So let us begin. I don't know. Some of you may remember a few months ago, I told the story of this first drasha that I gave in seminary. Um, and it was about this concept of fear, right? Uh, and it was on, where is it? This verse right here from Proverbs. Yirat Adonai Reshit Da'at, or Chochmah, or Musar, right? That the beginning of wisdom is fear. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And I translate it as awe. And a few days later, Rabbi Bill Lebo, who has an incredible memory, still does, a few days, he said right after the service finished, he said, I want to talk to you about your drasha. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. I don't know, a week later, 5 days later, he said, hey, I still want to talk to you about your drasha. Come to my office, let's go. And he asked me to translate, what does it mean? I said, well, it's fear, but it's awe. And he's like, no, it's actually fear, and you need to understand. And first of all, how he remembered what I'd said 5 days ago in the middle of a drasha, which no big deal, put the fear of God into me. He was a former dean of the rabbinical school. And so he's still an amazing guy, still in touch with him. But this idea, and I've always been struggling with this concept, and I'm trying, and so we're reading about it in this week, but in this week's Parashat Akev, that there's this concept of what God wants from us. But there's some verses here that it's not just in this portion that we speak about the fear of God. It talks about it in a few different places here, right? So from Bereshit, in reference to God, in reference to Abraham, he just was about to kill Isaac, right? Sacrifice him. And he says, stop. So he doesn't. And God says, do not raise your hand against the boy, right? Al tishlach yadcha el hana'ar, right? And don't do anything to him. Ki ata yadati ki yira Elohim ata. Because now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. Okay. Now I just want to give you a quick overview, and then in a moment, we're going to get into what these mean. I just want to give you a brief overview, of all these different places in the Bible, or not all, but a few scattered throughout, where it talks about fear of God. Okay. So in Leviticus, in one of the parts in the ethical commandments, where it's talking about how you need to behave, right? We might have heard this verse before. Don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. We normally quote this part of it, right? That first part, but we don't necessarily talk about this one. Why not? Because you shall fear God, I am the Lord. You will fear God. Okay? Then in Psalms, Reshit Chochmah Yirat Adonai. The fear of God is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Good understanding have all that they do thereafter. His praise endureth forever. That's from the book of Psalms. From the book of Kohelet, Sof Davar Hakol Nishma. The end of the matter, all having been heard. Et Elohim Yira vet Mitzvotav Shemor. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man, or of people. All right. From the book of Mishle, Proverbs, Yirat Adonai Reshit Da'at. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but the foolish despise wisdom and discipline. And then at the end of the book of Mishle, in chapter 31, Sheker Hachen Vehevel Hayofi Isha Yirat Adonai Hitit Halal. I sing this to my wife every Friday night. This is from Eshet Chayil. This is the end of it. Well, it's the penultimate verse. There's one more verse after that. Okay. So, which brings us to our story today. So just have some of these in your mind. We're going to probably come back to some of these, but just understand that it's not just here in this verse that it's talking about fear. I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere. This idea, this concept of fear of God really pervades our tradition in quite regularly. All right. So just the introduction. A lot of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is talking to the Israelites, exhorting them, telling them. The beginning parts of it are just this part that came before, a recollection of everything that's happened. And then the middle part goes into the laws. A lot of the laws that are brought up in Deuteronomy are not brought up anywhere else. I think out of the 100 or so laws, only 70 are brand new. They're not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. But before we get to that part, this is this idea here. When the Lord your God has thrust you from your path, say not to yourself, the Lord has enabled us to possess this land because of our virtues. It is rather because of the wickedness of those nations the Lord is possessing them before you. It is not because of your virtues and your rectitude that you will be able to possess this country, their country, but it is because of their wickedness that the Lord your God is dispossessing them before you, and in order to fulfill that oath that the Lord made to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? It's not because you're so good, it's because they're so bad. Okay? How do we know this? Know then that it is not for any virtue of yours that the Lord your God has given you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people, right? We're stubborn. Know this because it's in what we've had that discussion several times of all the things that we just keep doing. Okay. Remember, never forget how you provoked the Lord your God to anger in the wilderness from the day that you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place. You have continued defiant toward the Lord. And then it goes. Now it's going to go. I didn't put it all here, but it goes and begins to talk about a lot of the different things that we fouled up, right? And yet here comes a conclusion of this section, the Atah Yisrael. Now, understand this is verse 12 here in chapter 10. However, remember, the chapter headings are really a Christian innovation, which we like and we use, but they don't always make the most sense. Probably this should have been the beginning of a new chapter, but okay. The Atah Yisrael, and now Israel, Ma Adonai Elohecha, Shoel me'imach. What does the Lord your God ask, right? Shoel, ask, or demand from you? Only this, to revere the Lord your God, to walk, and by the way, this is, revere is the new JPS translation from 1985 or whatever it is, okay? Le'yirah et Adonai Elohecha, lelechet b'chol derachav u'le'ahava oto. Only this, to revere the Lord your God, to walk only in his paths, to love him. Sorry, I was correcting some of the hymns and I missed a couple. I do apologize. To walk in his paths, to love God. All right. To love. To love God and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, keeping the Lord's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good. Okay, for your good. Remember that. We're going to come back to that. For your good. Why do we have to do this? For your good. Mark the heavens to the uttermost reaches belong to the Lord your God, the earth and all that is on it. Okay, so revere. But we've already said yirah doesn't mean that. So just as a note, in the old JPS translation or the original JPS translation, in fact, in many other translations, most of them, it doesn't use revere. I mean, it says fear. Okay, this is the original translation. So it seems like we've made some. So first of all, this is all this other stuff you've just been told off for doing all these horrible, terrible sins, and we're stiff-necked and blah, blah, blah. Oh, but by the way, so what am I telling you? Why am I telling you this? Because this is the only thing that you need to do. Fear God, walk in God's paths, love God, and serve God with all your heart and soul, keeping the commandments and ways which I'm commanding you today. So that could be read as the essence of the entire Torah, right? That's all we need to do. Atah Yisrael. What do we need to do? Only this. Only this. Wow, that's a pretty profound statement. Of all the profound statements in the Bible, I think that ranks pretty high up there. But what does it mean? What does it mean to fear God? I suppose I could ask you, what do you think it means?
First of all, Rabbi Kaiserblueth, under what pressures did JPS alter fear to become revere?
That is an excellent question, which I do not have the answer to.
Because it's substantial, isn't it?
It's a quite yes, it is not an insignificant change. That is a very profound change, and I am unclear why they would have made that change. It in a way, it almost doesn't make sense to me why they would do that, because part of it is it more readable? Is it more relatable? but it fundamentally changes, right? It fundamentally changes the meaning. Revering someone is not the same as fearing someone.
No, it's
Right?
not.
And not at all. Not at all. So what are we talking about here?
So the Hebrew really does say fear, not revere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yirah. Yirah is fear. There's no question about that, right? Absolutely no question about that. So what is going on here? They're saying revere and not fear. Why would they do that?
Well, I think to come to the the modern reform progressive sensibility that we should not fear God. It's not that's not the modern sensibility. Revere is fine, but fearing isn't. I don't know.
Is it succumbing to the Christian view of the Jewish Bible with the image of God as a frightening
would be. I mean,
God?
So Meira makes a very good point here. It seems this is Meira's point. Meira, feel free to chime in, by the way. You don't have to just type it. Although if you're
Okay,
I understand that as well. Unless you fear me.
I definitely do. Just type some things instead.
Fear and awe and reverence, the full
Right.
Monty.
Yes. Okay.
Right. So Meir, I don't know if you can see the chat. She writes, "It seems to me that our modern understanding of fear creates a sense of oppression, but the ancient implication is more about respect and humility." Possibly. Possibly. I'm not sure that. Yeah, that could be. It could be that.
Have to work in the morning.
What other ideas do you think you might have?
I was saying that I thought that the Christian view of the Jewish Bible was that God was frightening and harsh and angry and demanding.
There are absolutely elements of God behaving in that way, or at least our understanding of that. But there is
I'm
there's
wondering
a range of beliefs in God, and
yes, but with the Christian image, I'm wondering if this is a response to that in an effort to change that. I don't know.
Hopefully not.
One hopes not, yes.
Yeah,
Don't worry. Jess said I can use her
Sorry.
that's all right, Joan.
So, Rafi, I see fear as a motivating factor for people to behave. So, in order to to do the commandments, it's better that you fear God so that you keep the commandments rather than seeing God as all loving and compassionate.
Yeah. So that's
Good motivation.
Mention behavior. We're going to come back to that idea. It's a very good point. All right. But it's what's also here. It seems that yes, all these things that you've done, right? All these things here that I'm going to mention that happened between the end of this verse and here, basically over the course of about a chapter or so. In essence, yeah, you did all that, but let's look ahead. I don't know if forgetting about it's the right term, but we're going to move on and see from what happened and move on to something else. I'm giving you a way to move on from that. So let's look a little bit and try and dissect and see, because the rabbis are, they do puzzle over what this term means, yirah. It wasn't just me. They do puzzle over that, and they do seem to think about, is this really that's all there is? That's all there is? So let's look a little bit. Okay, so the first one usually we turn to is Rashi. What's he saying here? Even though you did all of this, like all of that stuff that I just mentioned, God's mercy and God's love are extended over you. In spite of all that you sinned against God, God asked nothing of you except to fear God, etc. And do all those things, right?
Is it like a way to surrender to God?
In a way, but not exactly. I think that's one way to potentially read it. It's one way to potentially read it, but I'm not sure if indeed that's what they're talking about. But potentially, right?
More honor than fear. Is fear the right word? I mean, that's what it says, I know. But in our modern usage, wouldn't it be to honor?
No, honor is different. Like for example, in the Ten Commandments, right? Honor your kaved et avicha v'et imecha, right? Honor your father and your mother. It doesn't say fear them. It says honor them. Kaved, not ira. It's important that we make that distinction, right? That we're talking about two different things. Okay.
Also, like the will of God, like, you know, you can't question it. It's
Well,
right. You're kind of second in place when you fear something.
yeah, when you fear something, you
Something
are,
that's above you.
yeah,
It's higher than you.
it's higher than you. You
don't
are.
completely understand it.
I think you're saying when you submit to it, like that, because what is something that you're afraid of, you know?
You don't really understand it. If you're afraid of something, you don't know why.
That implies that there's, well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like growing up, I understood exactly why earthquakes happen, but they still scared the heck out of me. I was really afraid of them. But I understood exactly where they're from, what causes them, the faults in the earth and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm not sure if I would buy that point of view, that you don't. It means that you don't understand it, because you're speaking of an irrational fear, right?
Yeah, more of an irrational fear than a.
Right, afraid of the dark. Well, that's an irrational fear. Fine, okay, I can buy that.
But it doesn't have to be irrational. It can be simply that you're overwhelmed and you recognize that you just can't comprehend it, that it's larger than you, and it could in fact wipe you out. So the response is fear. So I think it's not irrational. It's perhaps the opposite of irrational. It's finally recognizing that something is, for example, God is greater than you.
Yes, potentially. So without coming to too many conclusions yet, because we will try and find them. But but I mean, what's also sort of kind of said here is that it appears, right? It appears that all we're doing, God is asking for a bare minimum standard here, right? Right? That it yeah, you messed all this stuff up. Okay, so all I'm going to ask you to do is just this, right? Because you can see the language, right? What is it? What do I need to do? What is God demanding? Only this, right? Like when my kids ask, what do I have to do? I want you only to pick up these 3 toys. That's it. Just do that, right? You've messed up and you've spilled and you've just do this. Just one thing, right? You could read it that way, right? If that's God, okay? Especially having read through all the stuff here in between, here's all the stuff that you fouled up, okay? Now, at this point, just want to get on with it, so just do this. Please, just do that.
But what is being asked is enormous.
Correct. It's not, I mean, you could read it as it is simply, and right, because like you have, and you have some of these verses here that, and like when we belittle ourselves, right? Like what is man, like this is just one example of very different places that happens, right? What is man that you have been mindful of him, mortal man that you have taken note of him, right? That we sometimes do that in respect to, and it happens quite a bit in the books of Psalms and Job also, right? So, and if it is that we are simply, right, and I think, Sherry, you were saying, well, this is actually not such a minimal thing that we're asking, right? But Moses is asking it in such a way that, because remember, Moses is the one speaking almost throughout the entire book of Deuteronomy. And so Moses is saying, oh, for God's sakes, just do this thing. Well, this thing, as Shira correctly points out, is not such a minimum thing. So the rabbis are now going to ask, and they're in the Talmud, and where they have this conversation, exactly what Shira is asking. Oh, hang on a minute, this is actually a big thing. This is not such a small thing. So what does it mean here? Okay, so Amar Rabbi Chanina. The Talmud cites an additional statement of Rabbi Chanina. He says, everything, hakol b'yedei shamayim, chutz mirat shamayim. Okay? This is a very, very powerful statement, right? Everything is in the hands of heaven except for fear of God. All right, they're talking here about a couple different things, but the implication is about free will, right? Do we have free will or not? And Rabbi Hanina is saying, no, except the only thing we have free will over is what? Whether we fear God or not.
Mm.
Okay? So,
But doesn't that mean that we have complete free will?
well, yeah, this I don't want to get into, well, we're going to get into a discussion a little bit about free will, hopefully if we have time at the end. But let's focus first on the implication of Moses saying, just do this thing. Well, it's actually a huge thing. So surely Moses would understand that, right? So let's understand the question. Man has free will to serve God, as it is stated. And now Israel, and as we're talking here, as it says, Israel, this is a direct quote here. Now Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you other than to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him? The Lord asked man to perform these matters because ultimately the choice is in his hands, right? Not God's hands, our hands. Verse says, what does the Lord ask other than to fear? The Gemara asks, is fear of heaven a minor matter that it can be presented as if God is not asking anything significant? Right? Basically, share your question. Didn't Rabbi Hanina say in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, the Holy One blessed be he, has nothing in his treasury other than a treasure of fear of heaven? So it is stated, fear of the Lord is his treasure. The Lord values and treasures fear of heaven above all else. The Gemara responds, indeed, for Moses, right? Indeed, for Moses, fear of heaven is a minor matter. As Rabbi Hanina stated, it is comparable to one who has asked for a large vessel, and he has one. It seems to him like a small vessel because he owns it. However, one who has asked for just a small vessel and he does not have one, it seems to him like a large vessel. Therefore, Moses could say, what does the Lord your God ask of you other than to fear? Because in his eyes, it was a minor matter.
So he's saying that Moses is a very just.
No, it's
leader.
opposite. For Moses, this fear of God came easy.
Yes,
Yeah.
because he's such a just, incredible leader. Like he's, and
I don't think the implication here has anything to do with his just.
No.
His clear and his very deep and profound connection with God.
Next.
okay,
That level,
Yeah.
he has that panim el panim relationship.
okay. But for a normal human being, it's a massive ask.
Are we really going to say then? Because, and I want to be clear, because it's not because of his leadership, because what they're saying is if he was such a good leader, he wouldn't have asked that question. He would know that this would be difficult for his people. How could he ask?
Yeah.
Moses, this is no big deal. Yeah, of course, right? You know, it's like Usain Bolt. Yeah, of course, anyone could run 100 meters in under 10 seconds. What's the big deal, right?
Yeah.
I can do it. You guys should be able to do it. It's no big deal, right?
But
So
maybe he's downplaying it deliberately in order to encourage more people to join.
Maybe. Let's see and this is there is just the Talmud does something. There's a different space where they ask this question. The same basic thing here. So really the rabbis, I think they're asking, how could Moses be so cavalier regarding his own high standards versus the struggles that many of the Israelites would have, right? This is not an easy thing to ask for. Oh, just do this, right? You know, my kids are making that, oh, Toby, just cook a 3-course meal and be done with it. Come on. Right? By the way, he turned 6 this week ago, so he can do that now, right?
A 3-course meal.
Right, but that's the thing. It's like, well, I can do that. Why can't you do it? Oh yeah, you could barely see over the countertop, right? That might be a challenge for you.
Yeah.
Right?
But this is very different from our learning about Moshe, that he was the humblest of people, you know.
Did you read ahead here?
No.
The next site.
Right.
So the idea here is, well, we'll come to that sort of, but like this is understand. I want to understand the difficulty here because it seems like if Moses is saying, well, this is just a very easy thing.
Yeah.
Well,
He's arrogant.
But it's not the only time that Moses has lost patience.
Well, but I want to be clear. The connotations here is not that Moses has lost. He's lost.
No.
it. He's not
No.
angry at the situation. Other places, you're absolutely right, Joan, that he would have. It was Joan, I think, right? Who said that
Yeah,
he
it was. Yes.
hasn't lost patience here. Here, he's exhorting them. He's trying to, and he's telling them, yeah,
Well, that's it. I mean,
as terrible as you guys were, or it doesn't matter. He just it could be read that he's just out of touch. Like, really, you don't understand this? Okay, so one possible explanation is because he's so humble,
Mm.
right? He's not aware that of his own spiritual superiority in this matter.
Mm.
One way we could read that, if we're saying it, that's the issue. Okay. But there's another way we could read this. Okay. So was he aware of it? Obviously not, if you read it from that reading. But Ramban, Nachmanides, he has a different reading, right? Nimshach al tov lecha, right? What does the Lord demand of you? All of it for your good. Remember, that was at the end of that. If we go, so what he's doing is he's saying, all I want you to do is all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. Why? All of this to do all this for your good.
Mm.
So he's reading it as saying, no, this isn't so hard, mostly because this is for your own benefit. This is your own self-interest. You want to do this because this is good for you. Why do we do anything? According to some people, it's because only for our motivated self-interest is the only reason why we do things. So God is making this easy. He's bare minimum. Why? All you have to do is do something that you want to do anyway. That's going to be good for you. That's what Nachmanides is saying, right? That is, God is not demanding something that God needs, but something that you need. As implied in the verse from Job, if you are righteous, what you give him, what does he receive from your hand? But everything is purely for your good, right? That's Nachmanides is saying. Well, so he's turning on his head and saying, it's not that Moses is saying this is too hard for, no, it's not hard at all. We want to do this. The only reason why we do anything, motivated self-interest.
Sure, Rafi, I understand that, but I'm a little bit concerned because I should hope that people are questioning each commandment rather than just following because someone says it's good for you.
Cool. Right. Well, yes, but I don't think he's trying to dictate, explain and go into such detail. I think he's making a broad stroke statement here that we want to have this fear and do these commandments because they're good for us.
Sure, and a lot of people who follow, like, well, not the Judaism that I follow, let's say the more religious lot, will take it very literally, the commandments, and will take these verses and believe that if they don't follow it, then something will happen to them.
Right. Like those people who were in that, I still remember this, when was this? This was 2000 something. There was a wedding in Israel, and there's video of it that people were dancing and the floor collapsed and a bunch of people died, right? And there were some idiots who came on TV or explaining that the reason this happened is because their mezuzahs weren't on their doors properly.
That was the hotel in Netanya.
Yeah, or something like that, right? Yeah, you're right, Anna. There are going to be people who say that sort of thing. And I agree with you. I don't believe in that kind of Judaism, right? But they do probably follow from this kind of explanation, but I think they're taking that out of context. I don't think that's what he means here. But, so I suppose this idea is here, the severity of this demand corresponds to the extent, not faux, but of the sacrifice involved. The fear and love demanded by God involve no sacrifice or surrender on our part. It is our own self-interest, right? Meaning the severity of demand, this is not a severe demand because we're not sacrificing anything. Because this is what we should be doing. It's in our own interest to be doing this. So this is Nachmanides saying, no, you got this all wrong. You got this totally wrong. This isn't a demand or difficulty that we need to do. That's totally incorrect. Okay, that's a different way to read that. So Joseph Albo, he comes with he is kind of the same kind of idea. He's going to expound it quite a bit more. And usually I don't do this, but I actually quoted his almost the entire argument because it's actually a kind of a beautiful argument that he makes here, or a quote that he brings. Okay, so in his Sefer HaIkarim, he writes, "Is fear no small thing?" And the answer given is yes. For Moses, it is indeed no small thing. Now the answer is not satisfactory for the opponent. For the opponent may say, it is not fair for a man of great wealth to say to a poor man who has nothing, I ask of you only 1,000 gold pieces. 1,000 gold pieces for a poor man are a great matter and hard to get. A rich man is not fair in speaking less.
Mhm.
Right? It's a different way of talking from the vase or the jar analogy, but this I think makes a little bit more sense, right? So it's not fair. So this is the question that he's asking. So we're going to read through part of this because it's actually quite a beautiful idea, I think. Right. So the aim which the soul is capable of attaining while in the body by performing the commandments of the Torah is nothing else than the permanent acquisition of a disposition to fear God. Okay? That's the whole point of what the soul is supposed to do in the body. And when it acquires this attribute of fearing God, the soul is elevated and is prepared to attain eternal life, which is the good reserved for the righteous and is the happiness of the soul. As we read, oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have which you has laid up for them that fear thee. Okay.
When was he writing?
He was also in the Middle Ages. Okay. He was a philosopher. Where was I? This is made clear from the fact that the Bible announces severe punishment upon Israel, and the descendants of their souls do not acquire the character of the fear of God by performing the commandments of the Torah. If you will not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, then you may fear this glorious and awful name, the Lord your God, and then the Lord will make these plagues. Right? That's quoting from later on the books of the curses and whatever. Okay. So I want to skip down just a little bit because I'm seeing the time, because I want to have some time still to discuss a little bit. Oh, that was loud. Did I skip too far down? Okay, so it's going over again, but again, and I'll happily make this source sheet available to everybody. But here, hence the expression in the Torah, you shall fear the Lord your God, though a specific command is a general principle, embracing all the commandments of the Torah, or a great many of them, right? For fear is that disposition which is acquired through the commandments of the Torah and is the noblest disposition for a man to acquire, nor can it be acquired except after great pains and effort, okay? So that's really important. I want to rats. Where was it? Okay. Okay. For fear. Okay. For fear is that disposition which is acquired through the commandments of the Torah and is the noblest disposition for a man to acquire. Nor can it be acquired except after great pains and effort. Okay, you don't start with fear. That's not the place where you begin. That's where you end up. How do you get there? He's saying by doing the commandments. That's how you get to that higher level. Okay, Abraham was not called God-fearing until after he had gone through his trials, right? Remember that quote? Now I know that you're a God-fearing man because you didn't. That is the only time that he's called that, and that's at the end of his trials. That's the last of the trials. And only then are we told that Abraham is God-fearing. That is said after him, for now I know that you're a God-fearing man, that you have attained the noblest character that a man can attain in this world in order to merit life in the world to come. For this reason, the Torah calls attention in many places to this disposition, and you shall fear your God, I am the Lord, right? That you shall fear the Lord your God, because it is extremely difficult to attain this quality, and yet it can be attained by observing the commandments of the Torah.
But then aren't we getting into a tautology?
Yes.
Because you're
Yeah,
being told-
there is a potential for that. And I think if we read a little bit more, I think he solves that. I think. But you're right. There is. I was reading that for this first time. I was like, well, that's just circular. That doesn't, right? So, for the same reason, the Bible says, and now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of thee? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in God's ways, and to love God, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, to keep for your good the commandments of the Lord. The interpretation of the passage is as follows. Moses is explaining to the people the extraordinary kindness of God. By right, in order to attain the perfection of one's soul, a person should fear God, walk in God's ways, love God, and serve God with all his heart and soul. But it is very difficult for a person to attain the required degree of fear, love, and service with all heart and soul. Hence, God made it easier for man. He commanded him instead to observe merely God's statutes and commandments, and thereby he may attain that disposition which he would get from service with heart and soul. Okay? Heart and soul is really difficult. It's not quantifiable. It's too difficult. So what is God suggesting otherwise? Okay.
Just follow the rules.
The rules, and then doing that will get you to that.
Who's commentating here?
Just a
medieval scholar,
medieval philosopher.
Because it sounds like Maimonides.
It's somewhat similar, but it's not.
I know it's not Maimonides, but it is in a similar vein.
Yeah. It would be because they were sort of. Well, no, he was a little bit before Maimonides. He was 14th century in Spain.
But can't we still argue keeping the commandments of the Torah is something done with great labor and enormous effort?
Yes, it is. But it's easier than starting with that plane of fear and the service of the heart and the soul. Okay?
So, Rafi, is this because it's more like a prescription for people? Because for some people it doesn't come easy to I guess to be God-fearing.
Yes. Well, I think Joseph Albo is saying it's not some people. It's difficult for all people.
Right.
We are not
Moses. There are some very special people in the world that go straight to the heart and soul.
Well, there may be. You're right. But for the rest of us,
including myself, some prescription is necessary.
Be in that case where it's like, well, this is just too hard, right? So the meaning of the above passage is therefore this. Now, Israel, consider the wonderful kindness of God. What does God ask of you? Instead of the fear of God, instead of walking in his ways and loving him, instead of serving God with all your heart and soul, all of which you are obliged to do, by the way, but that's difficult. I'll make it easy for you. God asks you merely to keep the commandments of God and God's statutes, what I command you this day, for your good, i.e., all of this is for your good, because by keeping the commandments of the Torah, one may attain the human purpose which we should attain by great labor and enormous effort through fear and love and God's service with all one's heart and soul. Okay? Again, you do what I'm asking you to do, you will get to that higher level. Or, put another way, you do these things, you will get to become like me.
So, like, Raf, who tested this out? Did these rabbis, how did they come to these conclusions? Was they just following Moses, or did they test this out on themselves? Like, how did they know that if you follow these commandments that you're going to elevate?
No, I think what they're trying to do here is understand this is it a bare minimum? Because also they're trying to read it in the context of what Moses and why he's saying it there. After all the things you fouled up, all you need to do is this, right? And doing that will get you to where you need to be. You're not there yet, but you do this and you will get there. Okay.
But there is the issue that Shira brought up of there being circularity, and that because that's pretty difficult to yeah. And you know, I always love the quite homely interpretation of this from Micha.
Yes.
This is what the Lord asks of you. Only this, to act justly, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with your God. I think that makes it a little bit more, as I said, homely.
Yeah. I think, well, I think part of the reason why there's so many different attempts to understand that is because I think they really understand this is really difficult. It's not easy. In
Oh,
the
yeah.
same way that there's so many different rabbinic understandings of what prayer is supposed to be, because it's really, really hard.
Mm.
Really hard.
But don't you think this is all really quite negative? I mean, it fits well with the medieval concept of fear of God and fear and following Torah, but it doesn't appeal to, well, it certainly doesn't appeal to me.
Well, that's the nice thing about philosophy. It doesn't have to appeal to everybody.
No, but trying to use the word fear and coming back to the idea of why the Torah, the modern interpretation, changed it to revere. Can you look at that for a moment? Again.
Hold on, let me just finish this piece because we're almost there. Almost there. I just want to finish him, and then because then we'll definitely have some time for some questions. Okay. So now he's going to come back to that quote that I brought earlier. This interpretation of the passage is worth careful attention, for it is very remarkable and solves a difficulty raised by the rabbis. Right? They say, is fear so small a thing? And the answer given is yes. For Moses, it is indeed a small thing. The answer is not satisfactory, for the opponent may say, it is not fair for a man of great wealth to say to a poor man who has nothing, I ask of you only 1,000 gold pieces. 1,000 gold pieces for a poor man are a great matter and hard to get. The rich man is not fair in speaking thus. But according to our interpretation, there is no difficulty. God does not ask anything that is hard to acquire. God asks merely the performance of the commandments of the Torah, because the quality of fear through which one may attain human perfection follows from the performance of the commandments of the Torah.
But there's no such thing as perfection.
No, but it's the soul attaining that, chasing that, right?
Mhm.
And this is the only path through which to attain that. Okay. So here he comes to a beautiful point. David also says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? That's from Psalms, right? And traditionally David wrote that. The meaning is the best and essential part of wisdom is to attain the fear of God. The word beginning, reshit, right, has the same meaning here as in the expression, and anoint themselves with the chief ointments, right? And they're doing a Gezer Shava. I don't know, what is it? Not a Gezer Shava. That's in one place when they use, it's from it's from Psalms 111, right? He's talking about this idea that the ointments that they're using, the reshit, they're not the beginning, it's the most important ones. Okay? So it's not the beginning of the ointments, it's the most important ointments. Commenting on the sequel, a good understanding have all they that do them. The rabbis say that do them, not that study them. This is to indicate that the performance of the commandments leads to the aim realized by understanding, that aim which all acknowledge to be the ultimate end of man. Okay? So what he's saying is, it's not the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. It's the most important element. The chief element of wisdom is the fear of God. It's not the only.
Attained by practicing, by doing, not just by studying.
Exactly. And that's his point. You get that by doing. You're not going to get that simply by studying. You're not going to get there by contemplation. You're not going to get there by just sitting there. You have to go and do it. You have to go and live it. And only by doing that will you get to that point. Okay? This is to indicate that the performance of the commandments leads to the aim realized by understanding, right? The performance leads to the aim realized by understanding. That aim, which all acknowledge to be the ultimate end of man. Also in Job we read, behold the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. The meaning is the aim of wisdom is to attain the fear of the Lord. And inasmuch as a quality is the aim of all the other qualities which are attainable from the Torah, through the performance of the commandment, we must treat of it at length in the. Okay, they're going to talk about that later on. right? So some takeaways here. Okay, I know it's long, and generally I don't quote a whole long section like that, but it was just a really cohesive piece, and I wanted to read it all with you, right? Albo admits that fear of God is no small matter, right? And he says Abraham was only able to attain that level only after withstanding and going through his trials, okay? And God does not demand from us this supreme standard. He's not asking us to go through those trials to get to that. Only that fulfillment of God's will on a daily basis in our daily routine, in our daily lives, that will lead us to a higher plane of fear.
But I
God,
still don't like the use of that word fear. I mean, to me,
well,
it's negative.
well, I'm trying to say it's not. All right, so sorry, Mira, you've been commenting. Sorry, I didn't even see
I
that.
didn't see Mira. Where's Mira?
So the commandments become a vehicle to this higher connection with the divine. Yes, absolutely. You just also wrote, could you relate the word fear in this context to gevurah in the tree of life? Is it an elevated form of spiritual discipline? Does fear imply truly embracing your responsibility as a soul, that everything has a consequence? I'm trying to comprehend the true meaning of fear. Well, you and me both. So anyway, did we understand what Alba was talking about here? Okay, and how he sets that up. So, what's the true element, or what's the true distinction of fear? Is well, it's not so simple. It's this idea, I think, that they're talking about is that it's that perhaps that's submission. I think one of you said that before, right? Who said submission? Was that you, Shira, maybe? I don't remember. So anyway, someone said it's a submission to.
Anna, you saying?
I don't remember who said it now. It's okay. That of your place in this order, and to come into that realm of how you relate. It's one of my teachers or someone told me once that fear of God is that fear of disappointing and not living up to your expectations is one way. And I think you can read that into what they're talking about there. To fear God. Listen, you've fouled up all these different things because, right, so now I'm asking you to have that fear so you are for your own good, you don't fall short of your expectations. You are the ones setting the goals here now. You are the ones that need to make sure that you attain that. And
So then why was the translation changed to revere?
I don't know why they changed the translation to revere. I don't know. I'm sure you've heard me say it a few times. I don't agree with that translation. I think that's not the right word there.
No, I think another interesting word to contribute is that contributes is awe.
Yes.
AWE, awe. That's that's got humility and you know, the submission that you mentioned just now, and a bit of good old-fashioned fear in it as well.
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely right. That could be an element of it. But it's interesting because I think you made the connection with Maimonides, right? That but it's actually quite different because Maimonides, the lofty plane of fear, he writes in his writings that someone who recoils in fear and dread, conscious of himself being but a puny, lowly, and lack of luster mortal, standing with his pitiful and feeble intellect before the perfect in knowledge, which to do all that demands contemplation, study, and intelligence of no mean order. Albo is saying you don't need that. You need to do things, right? The performance of these acts, that's how you get to it. It's not this idea of only thinking and studying. That's not how you get to that fear of God. That's not how you get to that higher plane of understanding and knowing your place. It's the doing that'll get you to that, right?
And that's why I really like, I'll go back to my my great love, Micha.
Yes.
and you know, the steps. Act.
Yeah, do it.
Do it.
Right.
Love.
without-
Love.
I
Tenderly.
and I think that's much
Or
probably-
humbly.
Yeah,
There's, you know,
that's probably a
humbly
different way.
has an element of this fear that we're talking about. This fear has the element of humility.
I have a beautiful quote on my wall from Rabbi Heschel, which says, a Jew is asked to take a leap of action rather than a leap of faith.
Yeah.
Mm.
So not quite the same, but it's on the same point.
Yeah.
I love that. Take a leap of take a leap of action, not a leap of faith. I like that a lot. That's very good. So
Rafi, like I always question this idea of, like you had mentioned, knowing your place. And for me, I don't think God is outside of us. I don't think there is a hierarchy. I think we are parts of that, of God. So knowing our place, I don't think it's necessarily, for me, that sounds to me like God is out of us and somewhere else in this sort of above kingdom, and we're below it. But I don't see it that way. I see it more as we are part of it.
We're
Whether or not we're one little atom or...
Yeah, but how is that different than still knowing and understanding your place? Why is that?
Well, yeah, maybe you could know your place by knowing that you're just one part of it.
Yes. No, exactly. I think people use the know your place as a pejorative, and I don't mean it that way at all. I don't mean it that way at all. That you are know your place, you're satisfied with that place, and you're aiming to fulfill that what your role is in that place. Why is that necessarily a bad thing? And by the way, this is giving you the tools to supersede that as well. Right?
Yeah, well, it's saying that that's the beginning of wisdom, really.
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right.
The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. Knowing your place, that is wisdom. Knowing the place in that very non-pejorative sense. So I understand what you're saying, Anna, and I think months and months ago we had a similar discussion in one of George's early circle classes on the issue of transcendence and immanence and negotiating the bridge that does exist. So I think it can be less of a hierarchy than a fairly sort of horizontal plane. I don't think we have to go straight into verticality just because we're talking about transcendence and immanence. Immanence is not the only horizontal plane. There wouldn't be immanence if there wasn't transcendence, and vice versa. But anyway, that's
yeah. No, I think that's an excellent point as well. Just to kind of finish this point, because if we're saying these things, then, because I know one of you asked before about that, the question of free will also, and it does tie in here, because remember we said that quote from the Talmud that everything, Hakol b'yedei Shemaim chutz miyirat Shemaim, everything is in the hands of heaven, everything is preordained except for the fear of God, or the fear of heaven. So what does that mean? Because that one could read that as well. We don't have free will then. Well, we do, because this is now Rambam finally makes an appearance here, right? L'chol adam netuna, right? Every man was endowed with a free will. If he desires to bend himself toward the good path and to be just, it is within the power of his hand to reach out for it. And if he desired to bend himself to a bad path and to be wicked, it is within the power of his hand to reach out for it. This is known from what is written in the Torah, saying, behold, the man is become as one of us to know good and evil, right? That's after they know, after eat from the tree of knowledge. That is as if saying, behold, this species man stands alone in the world, and there is no other kind like him. As regards this subject, being able of his own accord, by his reason and thought, to know the good and the evil, and to do whatever his inclination dictates him, with none to stay his hand from either doing good or evil. And being that he is so, lest he put forth his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. It's up to us. We have that choice.
It's our choice.
Because everything stems from action and fear of God.
Exactly right.
Everything does.
Exactly right. And that's why I think it's a beautiful point there. It's not the belief, that's the struggle. Okay. That put another way, right? You don't just decide to fall in love with someone. That doesn't happen except in fairy tales. How do you fall in love with someone? It's by doing things, going out on dates, buying flowers, spending time with others, chatting, conversating. Right? I didn't get to stay married 7 years just because I believe in love. You have to invest in the relationship, right? It's not like, Joan, you said how many years? 63, I think you said?
63.
63 years. Well done.
Mazel tov.
He looks very happy behind you.
Yeah.
Right? How do you get to be married 63 years? It's going through that daily routine, right? And it's not just we're going to be in love. No, you have to work at it. Yeah, it's not easy.
My husband would say that he always does what he's told. And that's a secret. But that's not the truth.
Still doing. Right? Still doing. This idea that this desire that we want things to just be. Well, they're not easy. And no one's saying this is easy. And Moses is not saying this is easy. He's acknowledging, that belief or that connection, that's hard. Okay, so let me put it to you in a different way. Aim for doing these things. Do these things. Doing these things will lead you to believe something. I think is really the essence of what that verse is talking about. Right? And you're trying to attain that fear, but you're not just going to get that because you want that. That's not how things work. You don't just get it because you want it. You have to work at it. It's not easy. But if you put the work into it, then results is very satisfying.
And it's not scary. It's not scary fear.
No.
It's not sort of gut-wrenching fear that we're talking about here. And nor is it the JPS revision into reverence.
I don't like that. And when I
nor do I.
It should not be reviewed. That totally
diminishes,
undercuts what it's supposed to mean. It cuts its legs out, and you lose the beauty of what that verse and the power and the proudness of that.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good to see you guys. I missed you guys.
Thank you. Right, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Malatov. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Peter. I was going to ask Peter. Oh, he's disappeared.